probably 99% of the problems and issues you're experiencing in your life actually come back to an impaired or broken relationship to self. Now, hear me out. So many of us actually don't even realize that we do not have a secure, attached relationship to self. And then in fact, many of us self-abandon so often and look outside of ourselves for how we can meet the needs of others and neglect our own needs that we don't even realize that our relationship to self is actually what's causing so many of the problems in our external world. So today I wanted to talk about my journey from self-sabotage to self-trust. So about 15 years ago, I found myself at a point in my life where my life was very chaotic. I was in a very dysregulated state a majority of the time. And I was having so much trouble just showing up and functioning in day-to-day life because I was having so many symptoms, both in my mental health and in my relationships, and even just, in how I felt about myself that were contributing to all of these areas of my life being in chaos. And this is kind of immediately following a major grief and loss episode for me where my mother unexpectedly passed away. And I felt my life spiraling out of control. And I just didn't know what was wrong with me because at my very core, I felt broken. I felt bad. I just felt wrong. And I felt like everything I touched or anything in my life or anyone who was in my life, like I felt like I was just causing more pain. Now, as the universe would orchestrate for me, I just happened to find my way into a healing community by way of my profession because I actually work as a clinical social worker and I work in mental health. But this training opportunity came along and it's something that I had always been very interested in, which is hypnotherapy. And practiced, on my own, different hypnotherapy tracks. And so I wanted to this was a training about learning heart-centered hypnotherapy and working on the subconscious level with people because my experience had been just myself personally, talk therapy for me was actually never really that helpful. I mean, I knew my problems and I could tell you what those problems were or what the issues I was having was, but it never actually took me beyond as like, well, how do I shift this dynamic in my life, or how do I show up differently or feel differently, or how do I sustain change and be different? Okay, which actually is the wrong approach, but those were the things that were really holding me back because I felt like I was doing all the work. I sought out counseling, I had tried medication management, I'd done all those things and nothing was working. And actually I was veering the other direction where I was coping in all these negative ways that were actually negatively impacting my life. So I found myself in this healing community. I learned how to do a lot of subconscious reprogramming. I learned how to do clinical hypnotherapy. I learned breath work. I learned about nervous system regulation and shock and things that I, even in my clinical realm, maybe were touched on here and there, but were never really prioritized. And so this was a whole new world for me. Okay. And so this is kind of what led to this major shift for me, moving away from the clinical model and moving it more into mind-body healing kind of work, specifically focusing on nervous system regulation and also working on, attachment wounding, childhood wounding. I did a lot of reparenting work and inner child healing, and then also breath work, which helped with nervous system regulation. And then I went even a step further to do a lot of the subconscious reprogramming work because of all the faulty programs that had been downloaded within me that were actually causing a lot of the turbulence I was experiencing in my life. So how did I move from self-sabotage to self-trust? And the answer is, drum roll please, is I actually started prioritizing and working on my relationship to self. Yep, that's the big secret. I actually started getting to know myself on a very deep and intimate level. Because I was always looking outside of myself in relationships to figure out maybe what I could do or what I had done, or, I was always looking for things to shift with other people or other people in relation to me. That actually never occurred that it was actually me that needed to be kind of not fixed. I don't believe that's true, but I do feel like, I needed to realign with my higher self. I needed to realign with my own integrity. I needed to actually get to know and understand myself on a very deep and intimate level again. Now, I will preface this by saying I had childhood trauma that I was working through. So I had a lot of childhood trauma growing up that was never addressed. I didn't even realize I had trauma. Okay, that's how my mindset was, is that I actually didn't even really realize the level of trauma because that was just my lived experience. I didn't know any different. Okay, and so it took me a long time to really come around to the idea that my nervous system is highly dysregulated because I grew up in an unsafe environment. Okay. Now, luckily, I did have a safe parent. Okay, but I wasn't living with that parent, and so it's complicated. But there were a lot of elements, and this has to do more with the step parent that I had. That was, was very abusive. So. I'm not going to go into all that. It's not important. You don't even need to go into all that. All I'm saying is that this is my experience as somebody who has worked through a lot of childhood trauma and kind of come out the other side of it. I mean, we're always a work in progress. Don't get me wrong. I still get triggered. Everybody, even the most advanced of us at times will have moments where they get activated. Now, here's the trick. It's really not about not getting activated or triggered. It's about knowing when you do that you have the skill set to self-soothe, right? That you have the capacity to meet your own needs, to show up for yourself. Like I said, that reparenting comes into play because when a young parts of us gets activated, which is, when we're kind of pinging on an old wound or something's really resonating that's unresolved, it's knowing and having the conviction that I have the capacity to move through difficult feelings. I have the capacity to hold space for big feelings. I have the capacity to show up for kindness with myself, for myself with kindness and love. And so I now have a skill set that I didn't have. I have a stronger, more loving, connected, secure relationship to self. And I have the belief that I have the capacity to self-soothe. And really everything is self-sourced. And that's part of this relationship with self. So what I wanted to talk about today was really working on this relationship to self is what changed everything. Because for the first time, I actually sat down with myself and started asking those deeper questions and really getting to know myself on a deep and intimate level. And I really started pulling back the weeds, if you will, to get in there to figure out, what is my current programming? What are the limiting beliefs within me? What things do I take for granted as truths, right? And started learning about, universal truth versus relative truth. And then really starting to question when I would have an immediate story that I would assign to something or a meaning that I would give to an event. I would really start asking difficult questions about, is this true? Is this real? Where did this come from? Is this mine? All of those questions that helped me to really unravel the fact that so many of the things that I believed about myself and my life were actually false. And those were driving the decisions I was making. Those were driving the thoughts I was having. The beliefs were driving it all. And then also the behaviors that I was engaging in or not engaging in. So really the way I cultivated self-trust was that I started really getting to know myself. Okay. And I started making commitments to myself that I was actually keeping because I was prioritizing my relationship to self over any other relationship in my life. Now, did I cut off my relationships and just go live on a mountain? No. Okay. But I was very intentional about telling the people in my life, like, look, I'm in this moment where I'm really trying to heal some things and I'm trying to work on, getting more integrity and more in alignment and more congruency in my life. And so I'm going to be reorienting my attention and focus back to myself. And, some people it was easier for them to accept. Other people it was a little bit harder for them to accept because I have a lot of tendencies that lead back into codependency, enmeshment, people pleasing, self-abandonment, all of it. So, not even really wanting to sit in the tension of having somebody, be upset with me or, not like me in some way or think certain things about me because I had been so conditioned in a different way. And so this was a really big growth moment for me, just to say, it's time for me, and to really set those boundaries in place. That's another part of this, is having healthy boundaries and being able to lovingly enforce those boundaries, not only with ourselves but also with other people. And so I really started doing this work, and really things shifted fairly quickly for me, which they can for you too, because once we start to really get to know ourselves, like all these light bulbs start to go off, that we understand that we're living this life, or we're living in this way that's actually just out of alignment with our higher self, if you will. Now, whatever your spiritual beliefs may be, or religious beliefs may be, this is more about kind of seeing this as like a high self, low self. Okay, so like the lower aspects of self, which I would consider like the lower chakra selves, those are all focused on base needs and kind of ego ideas and things like that, right? And as we elevate up through the chakras, and the heart is kind of the bridge, right, then we go into those higher level chakras that are more about expansion and spiritual ideas and things like that. Okay, and so the higher self is functioning from a higher plane, if you will, or a higher consciousness, and then the lower self is still functioning from that kind of 3D me ego perspective. Okay, and so I really just started realizing how much of my identity had been cultivated out of an ego state of what I should be, or what I should think, or how I should feel, or all of these different things that just always made me feel bad about myself and made me honestly feel broken and wrong. Okay, I definitely was a child who had a lot of big emotions. I was a very highly sensitive child. I'm also an empath, okay, and I know that's born out of trauma, can be, but I'm just saying I had all of those aspects within me, and I was born into a home where, I had a very stoic father. Emotions were not honored, or really they were actually looked at as weakness. I have a lot of all of us have this stuff, but just downloads about buck up and, put your big girl panties on, and, stop being a baby, and, don't be such a girl. And even though I was a girl, but all of these things. So, I really had all of this, I was so scared to even tap into my emotions. That was for me, I kept it lock and key. I mean, all of it, skeletons in closet kind of idea, where I just felt like if I opened that door, that floodgate would open, and I would never be able to get myself back into regulation. And honestly, that's what happened after the death of my mother. That was a significant grief event that happened in 2010. It was very unexpected. And it's like something shifted within me. I'd been kind of keeping it together and making it work and figuring it out for so many years. And all of a sudden, my old ways of coping just weren't working. And there was so much dysregulation in my system. And I was reactive, and I was frustrated, and I was angry, and I was just lashing out at people. And then as a way to kind of manage all of that, because it felt so out of control for me, I was engaging in substances and different things that were helping me to numb that. That's part of, when I did get on psychiatric medications, a part of it was that I yes, it did help to regulate me, but I was like, I was not a version of myself that I wanted to be, meaning I was very disassociated. I called it like zombie. But it's just where it's like lights are on and I'm moving and functioning, but there was just no life in me. Okay. And so that I knew that wasn't going to be the way. Okay. Plus long term, it's I wanted to heal. I knew that I wanted to, live a full life, and I wanted to have joy in my life, and I wanted to have good things in my life. And I just didn't think that that was the way. So let's see. Okay. So what shifted everything for me? Honestly, it was, kind of moving into this new space of, new ideas around healing and really prioritizing nervous system regulation. Okay. Because anybody who has any level of trauma, okay, and it doesn't have to be big T trauma. We all have traumas. Okay. But any level of trauma, really, that's a nervous system issue. Okay. Meaning that we have that hypervigilance, and we aren't often in the parasympathetic state. We're more activated easily. We're more in fight or flight, freeze, or fawn, tendencies and things like that. And so, it really is about, learning about the nervous system and then practicing those skill sets. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to take a long time. I mean, we can't put a timeline on our healing, but what we can do is show up every day with the intention that we are going to implement some of these practices to help resource ourselves so that when we go out in the world and we have a trigger, we are more able to manage it skillfully and not become reactive and act out in unskillful ways that later make us go into a shame spiral and make us feel even more broken and wrong. So if this is something that's resonating with you, or you can see yourself in some of this energy, I would love to work with you and work alongside you. I do have some resources down below if you want to check them out. I could certainly go through all the reasons why you should listen to me, and I'm, happy to do that. I have a clinical license. I've been working in practice a really long time. I have done my own healing work. But here's the truth, okay? Is that anytime we're consuming content or we're trying to learn or, gain skill sets or grow or in personal development, it really just have to take what resonates for you, okay? If it resonates as truth in you, okay, it's valuable and it could be helpful, okay? If it's something that doesn't resonate for you, then we just leave it behind, okay? Because there's no one path to healing, despite what many people tell you, okay? It's whatever path feels helpful and successful to you, okay? And this kind of goes back to our own belief work. Whatever we believe will work will actually work because our beliefs are so powerful. But we have to, get those limiting beliefs out from underneath there for that to be true, because we can't just consciously tell ourselves we believe something and when we have unconscious limiting beliefs driving the bus and believe that that's going to be enough. Okay, but we're gonna go into all of this on this channel because it's all the things that have been so helpful in helping me and helping so many others heal their nervous system dysregulation, repair their relationship to self, learn how to self-source their own love, approval, validation, all of it. Right? We really strengthen our own sense of self and our self-worth and value. It's life-changing work, and it's meant for you. And if this is calling to you anyway, please check out the link below or come back and visit me again. All right, take care.